Sherri Papini spoke out and told her side of the story, her truth, or the truth according to her. Oh, we're talking about it in today's video.
Hey, 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 welcome to the Sofa Squad, sipping from the cup at hey, hey.
Hello, Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa. Somewhere back there, there's a sofa. Maybe even two. And there's a Paul right here, but just one. My name's Paul if you're new to the channel. If you're not new to the channel, well, my name still is Paul. Now, what we're going to be doing is discussing a 4-part docuseries, I guess you could say, that came out about Sherri Papini. Who is Sherri Papini? Sherri Papini went missing several years ago on a jog. She was gone for 22 days. She then resurfaced. She had chains on. She had bruises. She had all sorts of stuff. She had a wild tale of being kidnapped by 2 Hispanic women and tortured, basically. It would turn out that she was never kidnapped after all. She was at her ex-boyfriend's house and she had him do things to her, like brand her, do all sorts of stuff that we're going to talk about to make the story look more believable. And then she resurfaced and carried out this lie for several years until she was exposed, charged with crimes, eventually signed a plea deal, went to prison, got out. Her ex-husband Keith has made, his own documentary about this, the whole 9 yards. So this is Sherri essentially coming out and saying, hey, here's the real truth. I had to lie back here, but this is really what took place. So if you have followed me, then you'll know that this is the way I do my kind of reaction to series like this. I watch it. I literally make bullet point notes on my phone. I put them up here on the screen and we're just going to use those as talking points. There's 4 episodes, so go ahead and buckle up, okay? Now, first of all, it starts off, it being the docuseries with Sherri saying that the story that the world thinks that they know that we know about her is that, like, she's a master manipulator, and she does this thing where she's like, oh, I'm gonna do ridiculous stuff because this whole thing is ridiculous. And it was so cringy, y'all. I'm not lying. Like, the first 60 seconds of the docuseries, I was already under the table. And also, if you follow other cases, if you follow the cases that I follow and whatnot, the Lori Daybell case, she reminded me so much of her when she said that statement. It was completely bizarre. Okay, so now Sherri Papini also says that, what's out there, all this, the version of me that the public knows, that's not real. It's a version of me that's been created to fit the media version of what happened. Now, she will then go and list all of the alleged false accusations, including the one that she was poisoning her children. This is something that Keith alleged, that she was doing this whole thing with making them have alcohol and this kind of stuff. We'll talk about that later on. She also says, I'm tired of, keeping a secret. I'm tired of living a lie. Okay. I'm excited that I get to finally tell the truth. Okay. Now we'll hear from a podcaster. I believe the name of her podcast is The Hoax or something like that. She'll talk about the case and how she felt like there just had to be more going on, because if you haven't followed this, just understand that this, number one, went international. Okay. But as this was coming out, it's like, okay, this woman went missing, like all these bizarre things that just don't fit a typical narrative took place throughout this whole case for obvious reasons that we know in hindsight, right? So you can imagine how many people are like, something just seems off with the story. Now, the podcaster, she'll talk about how the FBI was behind the scenes working on the case and whatnot. We'll actually hear from the lead FBI investigator who was on the case. Now, she will say that now she's retired and whatnot or something like that. Basically, she can talk about the case to a certain degree, right? We will also hear from Sherri's mom and dad. Now, at first, they'll speak out on the day that they learned she went missing. And as you can imagine, this is, an emotional moment for any parent. Now, we'll get into the tea about what they said they think really happens later on. Now, also another key huge player in this is Sherri's sister-in-law, Suzanne, I believe her name is. She'll speak about the day as well and how they were searching and looking and all this. And now remember, at this stage in the game, this is the very beginning of episode 1, you don't really know who's who and who supports who and what, but we'll learn, okay? Now, the FBI lady, the investigator, she says that the way that Sherri's phone was thrown out with the hair and the things wrapped up, it was an immediate red flag to her. We'll then start hearing recordings and things of this nature from Sherri's friends that have known her for a while. And they're basically like, look, honey, she's been doing this story forever, okay? She's been running around, running off, disappearing. They would say that she would create different realities for different people, and that ultimately she was just like an attention-seeking type person. Now, we'll hear from neighbors that live near Keith and Sherri, and they'll talk about, like, we heard Keith like yelling and fighting, talk about he was going to kill her, and they'll talk about these big fights that took place between the couple. Now, also we'll hear about when investigators, went through Sherri's phone, that they would discover men's James' phone numbers were saved under female names. Now, Keith did a post up 5 years before this incident. He caught her talking to other men, basically. And there's this contract, he's a big contract man, it sounds like. And they'll talk about this contract where it's almost like, hey, look, if you do A, B, or C, I get everything, right? But we'll come back to that later. Now, the FBI investigator lady said that Keith was an ally in the search, but that he also kind of got in the way and that his reputation was very important to him. She definitely acted a certain way about Keith, but she was being very professional. Now, fast forward in the story, Sherri is returned. Okay, so that's where we're at with this. Now, the FBI investigator lady is like, yeah, the fact that she was returned on Thanksgiving Day is a huge red flag. She's like, that's all too convenient, right? Now, they'll go over the press conferences and, this is how we're seeing how this kind of unfolded in the media, if you will, for the public. And then when the public learns about her story and, two Hispanic women took me off the road and did all this horrible stuff. And again, you have to remember the FBI is like, yeah, we do this all the time. And this is not making sense. Now, the FBI investigator would also say that it was super weird when they're looking at her interviews with the FBI, like, how they watch them and whatnot. And she's like, she's flirty and giggly and her behavior is absolutely not the norm, okay? Now, she also says that another red flag from Sherri was the Hispanic women wearing masks. And she was like, this just doesn't really happen anymore. And, I guess like at this point in the kidnapping world, right? And that she's like, generally females don't kidnap. Like this is a very odd random crime for females to do to another female. It's like, okay, what? Now they'll also talk about how the branding was some kind of a religious reference to Exodus. Now also the FBI investigator will say that she didn't believe Sherri's story. So right there, it's like, okay, bam, here's the first one. Because at first I was like, are we going to have the FBI investigator talking about, I believe her, she's innocent? But no. Okay, she didn't believe it at all. Now, we start seeing the infamous interviews that Keith and Sherri gave to cops. And this is where Sherri's one of her big mistakes, one of many. She describes the house where she was at in detail, and of course that will come back to bite her in the butt. Sherri will ask to work with the sketch artist, and she works with him, and that's when she produces the infamous sketches of the two women who allegedly took her. Well, the day that these are released, they find male DNA on Sherri's panties, and it's not Keith's. This will ultimately crack the case open. Now, Sherri also would apply for assistance like from the California Victims Fund and several other things. This is part of the restitution that she's paying back. She would take money from them. She would do all sorts of stuff, and she was going to therapy. In therapy, like details never really would come out, such as she couldn't even remember the car that she got into, okay? Now, back to that DNA. So they start tracking it down, this familial DNA and all this type of stuff. Well, long story short, they track it down to someone who lived with her at a certain point, okay? Had a relationship with her, and this man's name was James. James was the ex-boyfriend. Now, he describes Sherri being at his place and asking him to brand her. We're going to get way more into his story or whatever, but the FBI investigator later will talk about like, as investigators, cops, FBI, whoever, we always keep information back for obvious reasons, right? That the public doesn't know. And she's like, this man knew everything, right? We knew he was being truthful because he knew so many details that we did not release. So they're like, okay, you have our attention. And the story he comes up with is, like I just said, he's like, no, she asked me to come get her. I was helping out a friend. She wanted me to brand her. She wanted me to do this. It was this whole thing, right? So, but again, we'll get more into that and kind of his bombshell moment later as well. Now, they start talking about how this came about. Well, he and Sherri had burner phones and they had been planning this up. So, we'll get back to those as well in a minute too. Now, 3 days after the investigators met with James and got his story, they bring in Sherri and Keith for, again, the infamous interview. I did a whole video on it before, although I might do another one now that we have this information because I haven't watched in a while, but that's for later. So this is the interview where they're basically like, okay, girl, do you want to be honest? Your man's sitting right here. She's like, no, I got this. And they slap all of that evidence on her and she doubles down. She's not hearing it, right? Well, of course, she she ends up getting arrested. Now, that was the first episode. So the first episode, honestly, I was like, are we going to hear much more from Sherri? Well, they were just covering the whole story in the first episode. Episode 2, oh, she spills the tea. So let's talk about the tea that she did spill. Now, the director starts off, and I'm assuming when I say the director, it's the person, the narrator talking and interviewing her. So I assume this is the director doing this, right? But she will ask, the question like, hey, you're convicted liars. Like, why should we believe you? And Sherri responds, have you ever lied? Has that lie ever been blown up and been broadcasted around the world? It's much more complex than just calling me a liar. And then she starts crying and she's like, I wish more than anything I could have been more truthful. And I mean, y'all, the cringe, I don't know why they want to come in so hardcore in the first things, but it's bad. Now, next is a very familiar face, and that is Dr. Romani. I hope I'm saying her name right, but she has a YouTube channel. She's a psychologist or psychiatrist. She does a lot of content on like narcissistic personality disorder and tons of things. So she's in here and she talks throughout this stuff. Let's get to this though. Sherri's sister-in-law, Keith's sister, Suzanne Papini, we see her at this house, saging the room that she's in. She just had a little thing. I was like, girl, fill the fireplace up. You're going to need like a whole bushel of that stuff. Okay, go on, paint the walls with it. Just set them on fire, girl, because we need to get this evil spirit out of here, okay? So I was just in here like, okay, cool, but definitely you're going to need more. Now, she would say that she feared that, Sherri was going to be erased in this process of all the stuff that was coming out. And the narration switches back to Sherri and she's talking about getting arrested. And she's like, I didn't know how anything worked. I'm arrested. I don't know when I'm getting out or what's going to happen. And essentially she was like relying on cellmates to help her out with this. Then she also talks about how Keith created a public outcry and that his statements were actually the opposite of what was really going on behind closed doors. So like at this point, the docuseries is like really gearing you up for we're about to get like what her version is, right? Now, she talks about that other infamous video where she is leaving, like they bail her out or whatever, and she runs to the car and she's all covered up and she's like, whatever. Well, she says it was really humiliating to watch the video of her, being released from jail and running to the car and whatnot. And I mean, regardless of what she, I can imagine that would be that way for anybody, right? The narration goes back over to Suzanne, Keith's sister, Sherri's sister-in-law. And she says that she was sad that Keith was not there for Sherri during this time. And the sister-in-law, Suzanne, will ultimately let Sherri live with her once she's released. There's so much to go into with the sister-in-law. Now, she says, Sherri needed love and to be heard. And she said she felt like during this time that Sherri was like a sibling. And she talks about how her and Keith aren't really that close as adults. And then Sherri even says that she really enjoyed this time of living with Suzanne. And then Sherri goes more into like, just talking about the time and how it was like, she was afraid of going up against the feds and the whole 9 yards, right? Which, I mean, anybody would be, right? If the feds are coming after you, you're cooked, okay? That you're done. So Sherri's lawyer admits like, what, she told me the truth of her numerous meetings. So I'm sitting here like, okay, well, spit it out, buddy, right? And then he's like, well, Sherri finally says she'll accept this plea deal and admit that like she lied to the FBI. And he's like, there's this really huge story there, but since we got the plea deal for her to do that, like I never got the whole story from her, like almost like I didn't need to know the rest. And to me, when he was describing this, I was like, well, yeah, as an attorney, I don't think that you can sit here and let her tell you what the crime is and then like pretend like you don't know or cover it up or whatever. I'm not sure how the laws are from state to state with that, but when he was trying to tease it a little bit, like, oh, I got the story or whatever, and then he starts going down that path, this made sense. And he was like, well, I stopped there. I didn't want to know. We got the plea deal. So, there's that. We go back over to Sherri, the director, whoever. It point blank asks Sherri, what's the truth, okay? And Sherri will say, okay, so yeah, the Hispanic woman story, it just wasn't true. And she says that her ex-boyfriend James abducted her against her will and there was never any consent. Like she was not thinking that was going to happen. Now, then of course, the next obvious question is, well, why didn't you tell the truth? And she's like, well, there's several reasons. I thought I was in danger. I was scared of James. And she said that he said, like, essentially, like, I'm going to be watching you, and I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to be doing that. And I'm going to watch the coverage. And if you say anything, like, I'm coming for you. We've heard this same kind of story before with other cases. This is nothing new. Now, also a huge thing in this is she's like, I couldn't admit to Keith that I was having an affair. So she couldn't admit any of that or he would find out, right? Now, she'll talk about in the documentary and what we'll talk about, like, okay, she dated James back in 2003, way before Keith. Now, the narration will switch over then to Sherri's mom and dad. And the mom's like, yeah, I never really liked James. I just got a bad feeling off of him. And Sherri will ultimately say that her and James were like not sexually aligned together. She'll say that after she split up with James, she meets Keith and, like, the rest is history, right? She says that Keith was the type dude that was like following her around, making sure she was where she said that she was supposed to be. The sister even says that things that Sherri said about Keith were things that she saw growing up with him. Now, I'm going to say this right here with this, about that, whatever. First of all, I'm not a doctor, not a lawyer, none of that fancy credentialed stuff, okay? Just the sofa and some sass is all I got up in here. I don't know these people, any of them, and so there's that. Even if Keith was a controlling person, and I'm not saying that that's right, wrong, or indifferent, or that gives him leverage, where we ended up at over here is so crazy. However, there's so many red flags with her story about that. Now, also with the Keith thing and being like, well, he did this and he did that. And I'm like, well, girl, didn't you get caught like numerous times talking to dudes? So like the trust level's broken. Now, here's the thing with that. It's like, okay, to each their own, whatever you got to do to get through the day, right? If you are in a relationship where there's like such zero trust, and this goes for the kid, whatever, that you're having to follow your person around or do this or do that, or like that level of insecurity, that's a major red flag energy, and just, it's not healthy, right? So I don't know if Keith was always that way or she's making it up, because I don't believe much of what she says. So if it's to the level of that, and it's like, what do you do? You know what I'm saying? Like, well, what do you do with this? I don't think concocting an international scandal headline is the way to go, but that's just me. Okay. So that part right there, and again, because unfortunately the people in the docuseries will say that even her, when she's surrounded by, there's a credibility issue with her, of like, it kind of is what it is. Yeah, but I mean, I don't think that I got the vibe of Keith is this monster that she's trying to portray him to be. And she'll cite a few examples that we actually have evidence of towards the end, and we'll use those to talk further about that. But again, I don't know them. I wasn't behind closed doors, so ultimately I can't truly say. Now, Sherri will also say that early in the marriage, catches her talking to some dude, and that's when he does that contract, and it's like, hey, you're going to get nothing if we split because you were doing this, you're doing that. And again, that's a predicament to be in, especially when you have kids and this and that. It's like, okay, what do I do? And again, if I felt like this was really the truth, because I think with Sherri's story, there's truth littered in with a lot of false, right? So keep that in mind as we go through it. Now, she'll say that after she lost this job she had in 2016, that Keith is like in total control, okay? And she's like, he was just controlling everything. There was like even times where he'd be like, don't talk to me at nighttime, just this kind of weird behavior according to her. Now, she says this, of course, like she's emotionally shut out, so she ends up talking to James. They're talking again, they get burner phones to obviously keep it secret. Now, at this point, the lead prosecutor will speak, and she's like, yeah, there was no planned hoax. There was none of this crazy stuff that they were doing, right? So she's lying, basically, right? It's what the prosecutor is saying. They will say, though, they can't say what these conversations were between James and Sherri. So this is the loophole, in my opinion, that Sherri has found to say, ooh, here we go. They don't have any proof of that. It's almost like, do you have video of that? So you don't have video. So you don't know if I was at the bank when it was robbed. Oh, you don't have audio either. So you don't have any of that stuff. And there's no eyewitnesses. Okay, so yeah, I wasn't at the bank. See what I'm saying? Like, of course she's going to say this, right? Keep that in mind, okay? Now, when they asked, why did you say two Hispanic women? So like the daughter's like, why did you say that or whatever? And keep this in mind right here for when we come back too. She's like, because James's mom was Hispanic. And Sherri was like, I was trying to leave breadcrumbs to go back to James. And then it's almost like she's using the mother as this is how I'm going to describe. And then the authorities will realize it and they'll find James, and then he won't know that I'm the one who turned him in. Okay. Then we meet Sherri's psychologist. Okay. And he says that he believes that Sherri was abducted. He says he believes her story that she is telling now. know. Now, he also says it's like she was concerned to just get out of this situation with James. So she's like caught this major lie trying to save her life type situation. But then she gets out and she doesn't want to lose everything. She doesn't want to lose her kids. He's watching. So she keeps the lie up to protect him, which is ultimately protecting herself. Now, 6 weeks after arrest, all this drama goes down. Sherri arrives at court for like an arraignment, a plea, all this stuff or whatever. Now, she'll talk about, and her lawyer will too, about how she goes back and forth with the plea, with the language in this plea agreement. And she ends up having to pay like $300K in restitution. Both Sherri and her lawyer will talk about that language. And, she's very adamant about like, I don't want to admit that I hurt myself. I don't want to say that, I consented to this, to what he did to me and blah, 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 blah. And then Sherri will say herself, she's like, the plea agreement felt like I was still lying. I wanted to tell the truth, y'all, but I couldn't, okay? And then her lawyer's like, y'all, like, there's no motive here. There's no, like, anything for personal gain. Like, why would she lie about this? Well, I'm sitting there thinking this. I'm like, there's numerous things going on, but we're in it right now, part of it. She's making money and attention off of this. Remember, too, and again, I'm not a psychiatrist, we live in the age of attention is currency. And so a big takeaway, and I'm saying this now because I'll forget it, is watching Sherri. I'm like, this is just someone who really loves attention and probably just will get it any way they can, right? Okay, so then Sherri's talking about, this plea deal, all this type of stuff, she's going to sign it. And then basically Keith finds out via this, like it's almost like he reads the plea deal and finds out all this information, including the burner phones for the first time. So he is mad, okay? And she's describing, this is her, she's like, so he has this piece of paper, he goes to his sister's house, Suzanne, remember where Sherri's living. Sherri secretly records him. He's talking about, this is like some of those little snippets from it. He's like, based on what's happening, you're going to do this plea deal. I want full custody of the kids. You're going to sign this contract over here too. Like another contract in addition to the plea deal is basically like, if I feel at any time that you are not sound or decent or okay to be around the kids, like I can take the kids. Like, and I'm the determiner of this. Like I get to decide and blah, 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 blah. Take all bias out in the way I feel about her. I'm like, that would be scary if that was, whatever. But I mean, I was going to say it was true, but it wasn't. I mean, he was on video saying it or audio or whatever. So she's still trying to double down. She's talking about like, look, that stuff wasn't real. I just submitted that information from you, baby. Come on, baby. And it's honestly cringe. Now, Sherri does not sign that contract though. And she says that 6 weeks later, CPS shows up and that all the stuff he threatened to do happens. Now, I will say this, my personal opinion, listening to Keith talk on this hidden recording thing that she had, he does not sound irate. He does not sound crazy. He does not sound anger fueled. He sounds like a concerned parent who is looking out for their children, right? Because imagine, put yourself in the situation of you've just found out that your partner, whoever it is, your husband, wife, whatever situation is, just did this next level thing, and they're going to probably go to prison for a minute, whatever. You're sitting here talking about this person, I don't know who this person is. I mean, they just put off an international scandal. I don't want them around my kids. And so he doesn't sound crazy or anything. He sounds like a concerned parent. So I thought that was interesting to, again, hear her version. It was giving, how Sarah Boone was like, oh, wait, everybody, hold on. Hold on, y'all. I'm going to show you the video. Y'all are going to see that George is a monster. And then she played it and it was like, yeah, girl. So about the whole thing about who's the monster in the video, it's not George, okay? Like that's the kind of energy that this gave. Then they'll talk about this thing. And this was part of it where I was like, oh my God. So there's this whole thing that went down where Keith, like I said in the beginning, was accusing her of like making the kids huff alcohol or whatever. So they bring this up and she's like, look, my kids break out over the victim, you like put on your chest or nose, whatever. So if they ever have a situation like going on, she would take cotton balls and like soak them in essential oils. And it sounded like she would put them in a bag with a little string around it. So it was like hanging open around their neck or whatever. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, it was so crazy. So I was like, so you were doing that? Because you could tell that she was downplaying whatever she was doing. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds very weird to me, right? Now, again, was I there? No. So, of course, it's easy for me to sit there and say that from the comfort of the pretend sofa behind me, okay? Now, another thing that Sherri does is she records herself saying that she sent a cease and desist to Keith over the abuse allegations. And this is like her gotcha moment. It's almost like she's making a TikTok in her car. And she's sitting here like, that's going to be on the internet forever. And it's like, I'm literally like, it's the gaslighting for me, okay? I was just like, how are we even convincing ourselves that we can do this? Okay, so now, and this is like wrapping up the end of it or whatever. James maintains his innocence. They show how she's going to end up doing a polygraph. It's like the teaser. Episode's over, we move to episode 3. Now, episode 3 will start off with Sherri on the phone with her kids. This is 5 months before she goes to prison. She's recording this in a video, again, like a TikTok or something. They don't put the kids' voices in it for obvious reasons. Now, she'll burst into tears, and I'm just thinking this, and I'm like, you're sitting here in an empty room recording this. Why would you do that? Why? Like, who in their right mind would do that? Because once the kids hang up, she's like, and I'm like, girl, this is really embarrassing. No, it's so obvious an attention-seeking thing. Now, the narrative will switch to the current time, okay? And then Sherri says that her kids weren't taken away from her. They were stolen by Keith. Now, before she went to prison, Keith filed to get full legal custody of the kids, and it was granted for obvious reasons. Remember, she's doing an 18-month stint. She did 10 months of it. Now, she says that she has phone calls like every Sunday, but he'll cancel or shift them around and change the schedule. And she's like, it's been that way for almost 2 years now. Then we'll see news clips about Sherri like turning herself in for prison, the whole 9 yards, okay? November 2022, she begins the prison sentence. Now, Sherri's like, oh, I didn't blend in well. No, not at all. Stuck out like a sore thumb. Now, we'll also hear from a former inmate, and it says like friend of Sherri's or whatever. Now, she says that Sherri was scared of her and that Sherri was basically an easy mark. Sherri would let people like talk ish to her. And then when that Lifetime movie came out, all the other inmates watched it, right? And they're all talking ish about her. And she says like, you know what? In addition to her being a liar and a cheat, that doesn't go over well. All that racist stuff does not go over well at all. And she says this kind of forced Sherri to have to talk to them all and tell her side of the story. And then once she was done telling and talking, the inmates believed her and realized the media was BS. And this helped her make friends. And they like believed her story. And I was like, yeah, I mean, again, I wasn't there, so I don't know. So then we'll hear from the family lawyers that Sherri hired to help her with the divorce from Keith. And she hires them before she's going into prison. And it's like a father-daughter duo. Now, the daughter of the team will recount a time when she was younger. She had her own situation come up. She was on like a yacht. She was drugged. She was assaulted by a group of men. And she was in this situation where she had to pretend to be totally cool with what they did to her in order to survive the situation, like get off this boat where she was being held captive. So she was like, I could relate to how Sherri's telling the story about, I just had to go along with my ex-boyfriend to get out of trouble or whatever. Now, she, meaning the lawyer, will say that Keith is an abuser. And she'll say that, you know, this post-nup or whatever, this doc that Sherri signed basically gives everything to Keith. Like it completely screwed Sherri over. We will then hear from Sherri, and she recounts going over with the lawyers all the various abuse, according to Sherri, that she experienced with Keith. And she's basically like, you know, he was the type of dude that's like, you know, what are you wearing? Where are you going? Who are you talking to? Very controlling in that way. Now, she'll say that after the abduction that she's like super shell-shocked, right? She's like PTSD the whole 9 yards. And that Keith basically took control of everything. And she says that eventually they'll file for disability, and every month she would get like a check from them, and they got also back pay for it. And it would go into her checking account, and then Keith would take it out. And they're showing samples of this, right? So him taking this money out. Now, she says that she was basically to the point of having to clean Keith's aunt's house for cash because she had no money. Now, after that, the doc does one of those little things on the screen, like an update thing or whatever. And it says after the interview was completed, Keith's lawyers like gave them financial records that suggested that Sherri did have access to some spending money. Now, Keith's lawyer also says that the money transferred over to Keith was like for shared house expenses or whatever. Again, I don't know them. I'm not in their business. I don't know how that goes. I don't know what kind of expenses they have. I don't know how she or he was with the money. Now, the narrative will switch back to her lawyer, and they're like, you know, the kids are way better off, you know, without Keith. Like, they need to be with Sherri, period. Right? He is a master manipulator kind of a thing. Now, let's go back over to Sherri's parents. And the mom's like, you know, yeah, we never even knew half the stuff that Sherri went through when she was married to Keith, and she didn't know how cruel Keith could be. So then back over to Sherri. 2023, she's released. Remember, she did 10 months of the 18-month sentence. And we see her at her parents' house, you know, current time, whatever. They're at the dinner table, they're praying before they eat. And Sherri starts talking about how her parents were absolutely crucified in in the media, and the things that they were being said about them like just weren't true. Now the parents were then asked like, what was it like with Sherri before all this? And the mom says that before this, she was like always hiding her feelings around Keith. She was always on edge. She wasn't comfortable in her own skin, and Keith would never really like let them get close. He like tried to keep them apart. Now the mom says like, okay, since she's been out, they've rekindled this mother-daughter relationship, and that's been really nice. Sherri says that prison gave her that gift. Like they opened the door to the relationship that she now has with her parents. Now Sherri will say that in her early childhood, she was being essayed by someone, and that kind of like formed a lot of her personality stuff that's going on. And that essentially she like learned to please this person and placate to them the whole 9 yards. Now the mom says that when Sherri was a child that there was like this inappropriate sexual behavior, but it was like something they didn't talk about, they didn't address it, almost something they tried to just brush it away or whatever. Now Sherri says that her dad caught the person who was essaying her, but it was again something like the family didn't talk about or whatever. Now Sherri's psychologist will go back over to him, and he basically blames her parents for her behavior, like the stuff that we've seen and whatnot, because of maybe a lack of action. I don't know. Now the director will then ask Sherri to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth of the day she was abducted. Like, walk me through what happened. So they start off on that day, November 2nd, 2016. She's like, I've been carrying on these text messages with James, and we're talking all this. Well, James is like getting a little bit too close. He's taking this a little too much serious. And she's like, I didn't like that. And so she said she felt like she wanted to end things, but James is all like, well, look, I'm just going to come up there. I know exactly where you live. I basically like, I'm going to blow your life up. Like, you're not just ending this on me, okay? So she's like, I basically then just made plans for James to come to Reading to see her. This was going to be like, we say our goodbyes. So she says that he was getting super pushy that morning, like on text messages, stuff like that. And she's like, you know what? I'm just going to go for a run, and I'll let you know when I get back. So she's like, I start my run, and when she gets to the end where the pavement meets the gravel or whatever it was, or the gravel meets the pavement, whatever it was, she sees a car pull up, and she realizes it's James. And at this point, her cell phone falls, and when she reaches down to get it, that's the last thing that she remembers. Conveniently. Now, the director will then kind of call her out and say, in the transcripts, Sherri said that she left her phone with her hair wrapped around it as a clue for Keith. She was like, I knew he would find my cell phone, kind of a thing. So the director's asking her, and she's like, so what story is it? And Sherri gives this really odd non-answer answer. It's very weird. So then kind of stay on that moment. She has no memory of getting into the car or what James said or what he did to knock her out. Like, zero memory of this taking place. Okay, which is major red flag. Now we hear from doctors who talk about trauma and memory loss of details, the whole 9 yards, like, and how this could be a thing or whatever. Then they start talking, the directors and all these people start talking to Sherri about doing a reenactment of that day to try and trigger memories. Okay, so the day of this, Sherri records herself talking about how she's like, I don't want to run anymore. I used to, but I don't know more, and I'm scared to do this reenactment. And it's really cringy, y'all. Okay, it's super cringy. Now, they then show the reenactment. They're doing all these scenes of her like jogging and doing the reenactment, and I mean, pure cringe. And then they have like a car pull up in the way that she says that it went down. And she has this like emotional moment. And you can tell she's literally working up and conjuring these tears and starts crying. And she's like, I don't want to do this part. I don't want to do it. I can't remember. And it's so bad because we've heard from like other people and the FBI person, all this, that are like, yeah, the fact that she claims to not remember these key moments of, you know what you got into, right? And then go back to her doctor, and he's like, well, look, if she's a liar and everybody's saying she should be able to remember like something of this part of the story, then why wouldn't she just lie and make that part up? Right? And I'm like, okay, note taken. But I also think there's a bigger, grander reason why she doesn't make that up. And I personally think if I was going to describe a kidnapping part of a story, okay, and you were going to ask me how I was knocked out, how I was put in a car and subdued, you're going to get very technical and you're going to be saying things that they can then try and recreate themselves and see that you're completely lying. They're also going to want to probably look for some kind of injury or possibly test you for, drugs, or like, did they do this to you? Whatever. I feel like that part of it, she's not wanting to say, but also on that level, she's probably not wanting to say it as well, because it's like she probably just hopped in the car and they drove off and she sat in the back, right? I mean, I think that's as simple as that. So they end on that right there for the episode 3. Then we go into episode 4, the final one. Okay. Now, Sherri talks about this house that she's staying in. It looks like it's an amazingly beautiful house. She says it's a friend's house, and I'm going to do a separate video on this because I think it's the dude who, I can't tell if she's a boyfriend or not, but there's all this drama about his late wife who died. But Sherri comes in the picture. It's crazy, okay? So I believe that this is that guy's house, which I find interesting because Sherri's very shady about it. Like, I'm just staying at a friend's house, and it's like, girl, this is a massive home, right? Now, she'll talk about making crafts and Christmas presents, and she works the story around to pulling out some wooden coasters that she made, and she's like, see, I used a wood burning kit to design these, and she's like, James and I would talk about that. I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh, please no, please don't tell me we're going down this road. And she's like, I used to do this, but I don't anymore because of the memory. And she starts getting emotional over this wood crafting kit. Now, she then will show off the brand on her back, and she talks about how painful it was, how she could still hears the sizzling and the smell and all this type of stuff. And she said she still doesn't know what the brand means or why he chose the letters. And she's basically saying that it was this wood kit that she did or whatever. So I don't know if she just figured that out in the moment while she was at his house and had him go get that, like she authentically was already doing it, or if she went back out now and got it and created that whole story. But either way, it feels very fabricated. But again, I wasn't there. Now, the director wants to talk about the 22 days that she was with James. And Sherri's like, this is the hardest part to talk about. It's what I really had to fight to keep secret. And she's talks about, like, I remember waking up in the back of the vehicle and not being able to, like, keep my eyes open. And then she remembers him helping her into some house. She says she wakes up, it's a dark room, she's naked, the room's boarded up. She tries to get out, he hits her in the face. She's like, that's when I got the bruise for this. And then he keeps her chained to the wall, basically. No, she says that James said that he was helping her to stay away from Keith and that he was keeping her safe. And she says that she told him she just wanted to go home to her kids. And she said that James is basically like, he had people watching her, when he went to work, and he did crazy stuff, like all the stuff that she said. It's almost like she's inverted it around to him being the driving force behind it, if you will. And she then goes into another part where, like, anything she wanted to do, where he would be like, well, you gotta earn it. You want to go to the bathroom? You gotta earn it, baby. And earn it means she, like, got him off or whatever, okay? And to do that, it required her to be in pain. So you kind of see where this is being painted, right? Buckle your seatbelts up, because then they bring in the polygraph guy. But first, okay, they bring him in, they introduce him, and they switch over to the interviews between James and the police. And he's like, yes, she asked for help. I did what she asked me to do. And the cop's like, look, she comes back talking about you did this, like, it's going to be your word against hers, right? And he's like, I know. And he's like, she wanted the room boarded up. She spent most of her time in the room all by herself. She wanted to get branded, etc., etc. Okay, so then we switch back over to the polygraph dude, and they start going through questions. So he asked her, did you plan to go with James? And she says, no. And he says, I do believe you. And he says, did you remember getting in the car? She says, no. And he does believe her, like, whatever the results are. And then he asked, and if she thought she could, like, leave at any time without the fear of violence. She says, no. The polygrapher says he believes her on this one too. So then there was another question that was like, they started off with the 3, I believe you. But then another one was like, did you plan to travel to Southern California with James? And she said no, but the test said that she was lying. So then the way she counteracts that is she's like, well, I was leading him on so that we could still talk, because I, like, wanted to, like, keep the situation going. So yeah, technically, I could see where it would look like I was lying. Then there was unresolved questions. So one of them, did you arrange for James to pick you up? Unresolved. Do you remember getting in the car? Unresolved. Did you enter the car voluntarily? Unresolved. These are pretty major, right? Now, the narrative switches back over to the parents, and they're asked, do they know what happened. And the mom's like, you know what? Sherri was really unhappy in her marriage. And, you know, I think when James showed up, it wasn't a kidnapping. It was like, I want to be happy for a minute and do something different. And, you know, she says Sherri needed to get away from Keith. And the mom's like, I do not believe this was a kidnapping. There you go. Okay. Then we switch back over to the sister-in-law. Now she says that she thinks that that day was supposed to be some kind of a date, right? Like he knew where she was going to be, the whole 9 yards. Now she'll talk about like, I saw Sherri's body. It looked awful. And the vibe I got from the sister-in-law in this was almost like, I can't believe that somebody would do this to themselves or want this done. Like I just can't wrap my mind around that. Now, she says that it's weird that if this were true and James did this at Sherri's request, why has he faced no consequences? And I do wonder this as well, too, because even on the level of like assisting in the scheme, you know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to say he's guilty or whatever, but it just seems like you would get charged for something, but maybe he was also willing to, you know, testify or whatever. Now, her doctor says that he thinks she was thinking it was going to be like an afternoon romp in the hotel room with James. Almost like a wham bam thank you ma'am type situation, right? That went wrong or whatever. Now, the director will confront Sherri about lying and leading James on. And Sherri's like, you know, there's a component about feeling like this is her fault. And there's a lot of shame with that. And she'll go into that and whatnot or whatever. So another FBI guy talks about a polygraph that James took and how he passed it. And so you have both of them doing this. Now they'll show the final police interview with Sherri and Keith, and they're like going over all the evidence and, you know, Sherri doubling down the whole 9 yards. Then the director will ask Sherri, how did James and you both pass polygraphs, answering with different answers about the branding? Because obviously he's saying that she wanted him to brand her and vice versa, whatever. And Sherri's like, because he's a sociopath. You know, she's like, he didn't go through all the psyche about stuff that I did, you know, so we don't even know anything about him. Like she has a quick answer for this, right? Now, then the director will ask whose idea was the two women, and Sherri admits that this was her idea. Then the director will ask her how she negotiated her release. And Sherri's like, well, one night he let me out to eat dinner or whatever. And they're basically having this conversation of like, okay, this is blown up, you know, this is getting huge, whatever. And she's telling him like, you're going to have to let me go. And so she comes up with the whole story about being abducted and the two women, basically to make him feel safe enough to let her go. She's like, it's a horrible choice. It's a horrible decision. I regret it. It was the wrong thing to do. But then Sherri will finish off talking about like asking the audience, like us, like you're the camera, whatever, like how truthful have you been? And then she tells the director, like everybody lies. Like even I've caught the crew telling lies and you telling lies. And the director's like, fair. And I'm like, okay, you know, whatever. But again, I would beg to differ. Like this is another level of lying, right? Now the director then tells Sherri, well, guess what? We hired a PI to look into James, and they went, you know, they found a few things out. Number one, his mom's Irish, you know, not Hispanic. And Sherri's like, okay, like whatever, you know, and she's just like, I don't care if she's not Hispanic or not. Like I saw her twice. Like literally, she's just like, okay. And so then she says, meaning the director, the PI goes down to Arizona to talk to James, and they show this interaction. Now James doesn't come, well, James comes to the door, we don't see him. So he is not interested in talking. He's like, I'm taking care of my grandfather or grandmother, one of them, like they're elderly. He's like, I don't want them in all this business kind of stuff, whatever. The PI is like, well, you know, she's coming out with a book, which is interesting. And he's like, and she's basically blaming it on you. He's like, yep, I know. I'm going to have to contact my lawyer in California. He just, to me, acted like, this is a bunch of BS. I want this behind me. This was a dumb decision. He doesn't say this, but it's the vibe I get. Dumb decision on my part. I will have my lawyer do a defamation against this woman, make her go away, right? Now, at the end, when the director asks like for more, like, Sherri, how can we get confirmation, whatever? And Sherri's like, what more do you need, right? And she's like, I want the person that held me captive and tortured me to come forward and admit their crimes. And I'm just like, oh my God. Now, the last question she asked, you're asking the director, like, is it going to do me more harm than good? And then that's it. And then we show, like, you know, like when the credits are going up, you see a scene of like Sherri going into court with her sister-in-law and lawyer. And it's just this, there just seems to be so much attention seeking with so many people's behavior in this and enjoying like whatever kind of attention there is, right? It's weird. So here's a few things I want to say. I'm going to do a few more videos because like I said, when I looked into, and people started emailing me and like saying like, have you heard about who her boyfriend is and how he's connected to this and that and the other. And you start looking at this web and you're like, whoa, this is crazy. Okay. Like, absolutely absurd, right? About the connections between her sister-in-law and her doctor and her new boyfriend and okay. At the end of the day, and like I said, I was not there. Do I believe Sherri? Absolutely not. I do not believe this. Do I think there is truth sprinkled over a bunch of lies? Yes. I think some of the stuff is true. The same way that she sat there and described the room perfectly where she was at is a prime example. She didn't think anybody was going to find that. So she used the room in her mind as like, I'll describe it, but she wasn't banking on getting caught. This is like the Casey Anthony telling her side, the Jodi Arias. It's just, it is what it is. I don't believe it. I don't know why she did it. I don't know if she wanted to get attention, if she was lonely, if she wanted money, if she wanted fame, if she wanted to run off with the dude. I don't know, right? I don't believe this dude kept her captive. You know, whatever happened on those text messages, we'll never know. Maybe they had some weird little kink with each other that they did. Who knows, right? I don't know. But I just know that I don't feel like what Sherri is saying is true. The fact that her mother is like, I don't believe this is a kidnapping, and that there's other stuff is at play, it's there you go, right? And again, I do think some of it's true. Now, towards the end when Sherri was talking, and she was coming from the perspective of like, it was a dumb decision to make and blah, 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 about making the story up to get away from James. And I was pretending like, what if she was saying this like, you know what, I lied. Y'all, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done. I'm sorry. And I was like, you know what? That would go a lot farther. I think that's one thing that people want in these stories, especially something like this, where the person says, you see them learn. And you see them say, my God, what was I? That was terrible. Because to me, part of the human condition, the human experience is learning and growing. And you do that through various levels. Making mistakes is one of them. Mind you, this is next level. I get that, right? But it's all the other stuff on top of other stuff on top of other stuff that's there. I just look at the world she lived in. I'm like, none of it was real. None of it. And she still seemingly just creates this false reality, you know? And I mean, I would almost, and I mean, they didn't say this, but it's just my opinion. So it's just alleged. I'm like, I bet her parents don't even feel like they really know who she is, you know? And the relationship with the sister-in-law, I just found interesting because I was like, I just think Sherri can get around people and just kind of turn on her charm and just pander to what she thinks they want to see from her. And then that gets her way. So time will tell. We'll see. So anyways, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. If you're still watching, I do appreciate it because this is a kind of a long one. While you're down in that comment section, if you could please drop some sofas off for Roscoe and Spirit, Bo and Luke, myself, and the rest of the Sofa Squad so we can hang out and sit and dish on Sherri and Casey, all the cases we do talk about here at the Sofa Squad. And until we meet down there to do that, I'll see y'all soon.
I just wanted to say thank you again for watching the whole video, and also thank you for being part of the Sofa Squad. Special thanks to all the Patreon members, channel members from both of my channels, everybody who likes, shares, subscribes, comments in the comment sections. It helps the channel out so much. Now don't forget, I do have that other channel, the podcast channel. That's where we go live, we hang out, we talk. We have kind of sort of a schedule, but just be sure and check it out. I'll put it up here on the screen. And then like I said in the beginning of the video, if you want to follow me and Roscoe on the Instagram, go on, check it out. It's right here on the screen again. But once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being part of the Sofa Squad, and I'll see you in the next video.
Hey, welcome to the Sofa Squad. Sipping from the cup that hey, come laugh with the Sofa Squad. Can't roll my damn eyes hard enough.